So listen, this fight between Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter is the number one fight in combat sports that I've been looking forward to this entire year. Pretty much regardless of which sport it is. And I do enjoy kickboxing to a certain degree. And I love MMA. Boxing's my first love. Well, not my first love, but it's the one I fell in love with because I got into I was training in MMA before I got into boxing, but I was doing some traditional martial arts a little bit before then, but not a whole lot. But I got into MMA, but I didn't start competing and really coaching and teaching until I was a boxer. And as a boxer, I just fell in love with boxing. So boxing is pretty much my first love as far as engaging in it and some of my nuanced knowledge of it. So let's talk about this fight between Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter. My take on it, Brody's take on it, Coach Brody's take on it is that this is going to come down to a few different factors, right? And just to make a breakdown of their styles, I love both fighters. Terrence Crawford is one of my top 2 to 3 favorite fighters in the sport, and or of my favorite styles, right? I love his style. I love Canelo Alvarez style, and I love Errol Spence's style. Those are just 3 fighters whose styles I really love. I also love Alexander Usyk's style. Like, his style is dope too. But when we're just looking at and Gervonta Tank Davis, I gotta throw him up there too. I just love how they fight. But let's say we're talking about just Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter styles. Terrence Crawford, of course, he's known for being that switch hitter. And although he's a right-handed fighter, most of the time his biggest wins and his most high-profile dominant wins were achieved from the southpaw stance. So, and then he often does not switch back and forth fluidly. Like, let's say, Jerron Boots Ennis or Marvin Hagler or different people or Mike Tyson on the inside. People don't give Mike Tyson credit for how he would switch stances when he was on the inside, right? So what I'll say is this. When it comes to Terrence Crawford, he usually comes out orthodox, and he does that a little bit to find his rhythm. And then after he finds his rhythm, he finds his openings, he switches southpaw, and just whatever works for him works best. Most people are more uncomfortable with southpaw, so Terrence Crawford could be equally good from southpaw and right-handed. Excuse me. It's just that people are not as used to fighting southpaws on a high level. So for Terrence Crawford, it just tends to be the easiest thing. But he has championship level wins on both sides. You get what I'm saying? So a big aspect of his style is that Terrence Crawford is a dog, but he's a smart dog. You know what I mean? He has a really big ego, and though that big ego draws him into firefights at times, but within those fights, he has very quick reflexes. He has very quick twitch muscles. He has very explosive power and sharpshooting tactics. But his sharpshooting is different than a lot of sharpshooters. A lot of sharpshooters, they're on the outside, and then they throw straight punches. Terrence Crawford has power with looping punches. He has knockout power with looping punches. He can create knockout power from unorthodox angles. And this is one thing that I think is going to be a big factor in the fight, right? It's going to be a big factor in the fight because it's something that can either keep Sean Porter honest or he could get the stoppage from this. So another aspect of Terrence Crawford's style is that he has very good footwork. He has very good timing, but he really uses his rhythm and his range as his defense. So while Terrence Crawford is a very good fighter as far as when it comes to brawls, he doesn't have the best defense for protecting himself, and sometimes this leaves him vulnerable in the earlier rounds. I wouldn't think that Sean Porter has that one-punch power to really get Terrence out of there early. I could be wrong, but I doubt it. So when Terrence Crawford is cold and he's first getting out there, he's susceptible to getting hit with some hard shots. And then when Terrence Crawford gets into that bloodlust and he's ready to really fight, and then he starts getting into those fights, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Terrence Crawford gets hit, and he gets hit with punches that fighters of his caliber typically don't get hit with. You don't see Canelo getting hit flush with the type of shots that you see Terrence Crawford getting hit with, and you typically don't see Errol Spence getting hit as flush with the type of shots that you see Terrence Crawford getting hit with. But the difference is this right here, right? So I'm gonna do an analysis of the styles, and then after I do an analysis of the styles, I'm gonna break down some of their fights a little bit to give my perspective on how this may go. So Terrence Crawford, one thing that he has really good is he is able to throw that right hand right over the jab from the southpaw stance. So he has the longest reach in the division. Of the top fighters at the welterweight division, he has the highest reach, longest reach. So I believe his reach is like 63 or 64 inches. That's like 6'1" or 6'2", right? Even though he's 5'8". 5'8" already gives him a height advantage over Sean Porter, right? So another aspect of it is Terrence Crawford knows how to change his rhythm, and he knows how to fight very well from the outside and to outbox opponents, and then look for in a moment where he touches them good, and then he might swarm on them to further capitalize when he smells blood in the water. But he can force that blood in the water because Terrence Crawford has a very big ego. So when he's fighting, if someone feels they can do something better than him, he feels that this is his opportunity to show that he's better at it. And this is a perspective that can help your credibility as far as being a fighter. But this is also something that can show a lack of discipline at times. But he's also a fighter who still undefeated. He gets the job done. But that's something that may cost him somewhere down the line. When it comes to Terrence Crawford, he has very good punch variety. One of the best things in his arsenal is his punch variety and his ability to create power from unorthodox angles and to change those angles. Now, if he were a fighter who could switch between right-handed and southpaw more fluently, like Jaron Boots Ennis, then he would be in a position where he could take advantage of that more. But he's just such a skilled fighter that, he'll get you used to one thing and then he'll switch over. And when he switches over, he usually already has you read, and then he already has you figured out. And then he does whatever he's going to do to you all night. Then we look at Sean Porter's style. Sean Porter is an athletic fighter. He's a strong fighter. He's a tough fighter. He's a rugged fighter. Not necessarily the biggest one-punch knockout artist, as in the percentage of knockouts he has is not that high, but that's also due in part to the fact that he's fought at the high level for a long time. But he kind of rushes forward like a raging bull. Not always, because like when he fought, what's his name, the guy that just beat Manny Pacquiao, when he fought Yordenis Ugas, he boxed from the outside, and a lot of people thought that he lost that fight, but he won the fight on paper. But that was a really good fighter that he fought. That's a really good technical boxer, and I think that when we're looking at Yordenis Ugas, some of his style is a little bit similar to Terrence Crawford. Not very similar, but the way he is a very technical fighter who uses looping punches instead of overly relying on straight punches when he's fighting right-handed versus southpaw is something that is a little bit cognizant. It's a little bit, resembles Terrence Crawford's style. But he doesn't have the same reach that Terrence Crawford has, and he doesn't have the same power that Terrence Crawford has. So if you're looking at, Sean Porter trying to box Terrence Crawford the way that he boxed Yordenis Ugas, that shit's not going to work. It's not. But Yordenis Ugas may have better defense than Terrence Crawford. That may be possible. There's this Cuban school of boxing. You know what I mean? But Terrence Crawford is beating people in the Cuban school of boxing, like Felix Diaz. To me, that was a good win. And Felix Diaz is also somebody who has a style that's not too different from Sean Porter because, he's more of a stocky fighter, more of a stocky build. But I don't remember. I think he might have been a southpaw himself. I could be wrong on that. Felix Diaz might not have been a southpaw. But when you're looking at Sean Porter's style, it's kind of like a bulldog. He's kind of like a bulldog in the way he fights. He's real rough. He's real tough. And it's really that consistent pressure that he applies to somebody. Now, when we're looking at this stylistic matchup, One thing you have to call into question is the possibility of Terrence Crawford getting hurt. A big factor in this fight is going to be the referee, whether or not he allows Sean Porter to get away with some of his dirty tactics, whether or not the referee allows Sean Porter to stay on the inside for an extended period of time. A big factor in this fight is going to be the range between the two fighters, right? The range. Because if they stay completely on the outside, the foot speed, the ring generalship of Terrence Crawford is better than the ring generalship of Sean Porter. Ring generalship is pretty much Terrence Crawford's defense. So his ring generalship is better. So if they fight on the outside, that significant reach advantage is going to play a big part of Terrence Crawford being able to win. If they fight on the in brawling range, one thing I think is very highly possible is that Terrence Crawford is going to catch Sean Porter with some looping shit while he's lunging in. Now, Terrence Crawford will put himself in the way to do it, and Sean Porter might actually be a bad. Terrence Crawford may actually be a really bad matchup for Sean Porter because Terrence Crawford can create power while moving backwards, while moving forward, and he has a long reach, and he can create it at looping angles, and he's not afraid to put himself in the way a little bit. So if Terrence Crawford can handle the power of Sean Porter, which is not too far out of the realm of possibility, I do see him landing maybe a right hook, or a right hook uppercut, a right from the southpaw stance, either a right hook uppercut variation or a left hook uppercut variation, and maybe even an overhand to some extent. And the reason I say this is I don't necessarily see Terrence Crawford is beating him with straight punches. I see Sean Porter coming in strong, trying to push the action. He may get frustrated if he tries to box with Terrence Crawford. Like, let's say if he tries to box, if Terrence Crawford comes out in the right-handed stance, and then if Sean Porter tries to box it first, then I could see Terrence Crawford doing his thing. But one thing I think may happen is this: Sean Porter and his trainer, Kenny Porter, his father, may have already peeped that Terrence Crawford is often a slow starter. Even with the fighters that are below his caliber, he may end up losing some of the early rounds. So Sean Porter may come straight out the gate. And if Terrence Crawford starts off trying to catch his rhythm, if Sean Porter does not have enough power to get that done, and to get enough rounds in the bag, then he's probably going to lose if he doesn't start strong. Terrence Crawford has a history of a very good gas tank. Both of them have a very good gas tank. They're both professionals, and they're both very good fighters. But Terrence Crawford also hasn't been getting in as many rounds lately. But another aspect is that Sean Porter is susceptible to late knockdowns. And what I do need to talk about is that when we're comparing the different fighters that they fought who had similarities in their styles or similarities in their prestige, we're going to look at the rough and tough style of Jeff Horn, who's also not the biggest puncher but has some power, who was a little bit bigger than Sean Porter as far as his size. But at the same time, he was very rough and tough. He was able to rough up Manny Pacquiao, throwing, weird, awkward punches, being a dirty fighter. And Terrence Crawford was able to work from the outside, work his looping punches, his straight punches, and he was able to work to his body, work to his head, use his ring generalship, just generally outsmart him and get him up out of there. You know what I mean? Just outclassed him. And I do not think that's out the realm of possibility, right? Because I think Jeff Horn is underrated, right? Another aspect of what we can talk about is this right here. People talk about how Sean Porter was able to go toe-to-toe with Errol Spence. The thing to think about Errol Spence, and Sean Porter brought this up himself, it's that Errol Spence typically is a fighter who is either an inside pressure fighter who works to get on the inside for body shots. He's going to work, his right hook up top. He's going to work a very good jab, and he's going to set his rhythm with his jab. Then he's going to get inside, right? And he's going to throw that, left uppercut to the body. He's going to throw that left hook around the gloves. He's going to throw the straight left hand. These are the punches that he's going to throw. He might, double up with the, left hook to the body, right hook to the body, right? The thing about Errol Spence Jr., and that's what I was talking about just now, Errol Spence Jr., is that he typically allows some aspect of wherever he sees the path of least resistance with his opponent in an overall sense of the match is where he's going to go. So if you look at how Errol Spence fought Mikey Garcia, when he fought Mikey Garcia, I don't think it was as simple as he went in there and decided he was going to box. He probably felt a little bit of Mikey Garcia's power and decided, you know what, I'm much longer than him. I have a very good jab. Let me just show that I can outbox him. I think they probably just tried to switch up the narrative after the fact to make it seem like Errol Spence was completely in control of that situation so that he'll make him look better. But I do think that while Errol Spence has the tools to do a variety of things, that he kind of allows what feels like the path of least resistance to control what pace of a fight he takes. So if Errol Spence feels like he can be in a fight with an individual, and in the fight with a particular individual that it's going to take more energy than necessary for him to keep it a boxing match, or if someone's going to be very aggressive, then he can get pulled into a brawling match, right? And Errol Spence can fight off the back foot, but he hasn't necessarily showed power fighting off the back foot like that. You know what I mean? There was somebody who he fought where there was a similar situation to that. I'm trying to remember who it is. It was somebody who he hit with a right hook, a check right hook, as he was, moving backwards a little bit. But for the most part, if Errol Spence is on the back foot, he's boxing. If he's on the front foot, he's applying pressure. And he's going to systematically break you down over the course of the fight. Terrence Crawford is more of, he's going to hurt you with one specific punch very bad, and then he's going to get you out of there. And that is a different style that is a lot less favorable when it comes to dealing with Shawn Porter, than Errol Spence's style. Because Errol Spence's punch variety is not like Terrence Crawford's punch variety. His defense is better, but he also is not constantly looking for the knockout in every fight the way he fights. If he doesn't see the knockout's going to come easy for Errol Spence, if he doesn't see it's going to come easy, then he resigns to win on points. And that is a smart move to make, but it's the path of least resistance. And Terrence Crawford is not a path of least resistance type of fighter. Terrence Crawford is, I'm going to embarrass you type of fighter, right? He wants to look very good while he's doing it, right? So if we're looking at the fight from this particular type of angle, we can also look at Shawn Porter when he fought Errol Spence. When he fought him, there's a late knockdown that swayed the cards. When Shawn Porter fought Adrian Broner, he got dropped, right? He got dropped when he fought Adrian Broner. That's because when a fighter feels that pressure from Shawn Porter, they're often afraid of running out of energy. They're afraid of getting tired. So they reserve their energy and they try not to get in too much of a firefight to where he's dragging them completely into the game. But Terrence Crawford, if he decides to go there, he doesn't mind going all the way there. He doesn't mind getting all the way into the gutter, right? He will go there with him if he feels like it. If Terrence Crawford gets tagged with a good one, then that's when it will probably turn into a fight. If Terrence Crawford is able to avoid getting hit very clean with a good shot and boxes well from the beginning, then he may just systematically try to break down Shawn Porter. I don't see Shawn Porter systematically breaking down Terrence Crawford in the same way, but I do see him possibly having the ability to frustrate Terrence Crawford. But when Terrence Crawford gets frustrated, he goes into seek and destroy mode. And with seek and destroy mode, I do see Terrence Crawford having the power and the ability to be able to do that. So we do have to count for the roughhousing, but for the roughhousing type of fighters that Terrence Crawford has fought, he's had very light work with them, very easy work with those guys, right? When we're talking about fighting on the inside, I haven't seen a whole lot of Terrence Crawford fighting on the inside, but we also have to acknowledge that Terrence Crawford has been hurt by different fighters. He got hurt by Yuriorkis Gamboa because, but I think Yuriorkis Gamboa is a big explosive puncher, right? And I don't mean this to disrespect Shawn Porter in any ways, but pound for pound for his weight class, Yuriorkis Gamboa was probably a bigger puncher than Shawn Porter is. But we also had to look at Igis Kavalauskas. But Igis Kavalauskas had about, Igis Kavalauskas probably had over 80%, 90% knockout ratio. So Igis Kavalauskas, the Mean Machine, he was a good puncher. He may not have been a world beater as far as his skills, but he was a good puncher. And if we're looking at fights from that perspective, it does work like that. Another thing is this: Kell Brook was able to frustrate Terrence Crawford with his jab. Now, one narrative I don't like, and I just have to throw this in here, I give Terrence Crawford more credit for that Kell Brook win than a lot of people want to, because I don't think Kell Brook was as much of damaged goods going into that fight as people think he was. I think that Terrence Crawford just caught him. When Kell Brook fought Gennady Golovkin, he got systematically broken down through those power shots, breaking his orbital bone. When he fought, and it took 5 rounds, and then he didn't even really get dropped. When Kell Brook fought Errol Spence, it took 11 rounds of him getting systematically broken down, and it was the other eye socket. So he got glass eye sockets, right? But when Kell Brook fought Terrence Crawford, he got hit clean with a punch he didn't see coming, and he got rocked. And before that point, he was boxing well. And that high level of boxing IQ that he used, those holding tactics to counteract because Kell Brook is one of the biggest welterweights in the game. So Kell Brook's holding and jabbing, long jab, hold, very crisp 1-2. I wonder if Terrence Crawford is going to use, some tactics similar to that in this fight, but I'm not sure. But I do think if we're looking at the fights that they had, it is somewhat accurate to look at the fights that both of them had with Kell Brook, because that is a common opponent. It is a common opponent. And I don't think Kell Brook was as washed up as people thought he was when they fought. I think Terrence Crawford deserves a little bit more credit for that. But we'll know how much credit to give him after this fight right here. So how I see this fight going is it's going to depend on different things. How quickly is what stance is he going to come in, and how quickly is he going to change the stance, right? Because Terrence Crawford typically doesn't seem as effective from the orthodox stance, even though he's an orthodox fighter. Some fighters are right-handed and they fight are right-handed and they fight southpaw, right? This is something that's been going on a long time. Most niggas in the street, they fight with a strong hand in the front. Not Muhammad Ali, but Joe Frazier, he was an inverted southpaw who fought orthodox. I'm not sure if Mike Tyson was left-handed, but if we look at Vasyl Lomachenko, he is, right-handed, fights as an inverted orthodox fighter. There's different people who they just excel fighting with a strong hand in the front. And when you have equal power in both hands, it's just whatever frustrates the other person the most that does well. I think that the length of Terrence Crawford is going to do well for him. I think that his snipe shooting ability to sharp shoot with his punches from a distance and his long reach is going to play a big factor. I think that the referee is going to play a big factor. I would not be surprised to see a 8 to 9 round stoppage from Terrence Crawford, or even up to 12. But what I can also say is this: if Terrence Crawford comes out too slow and Shawn Porter is able to break his rhythm and keep him from getting his rhythm, then Shawn Porter could come out and start trying to rough him up from the opening bell. And then Terrence Crawford can put himself into a position where he's backed into a corner, starts losing too many rounds, and then he may start trying to chase after Shawn Porter for the knockout finish, right? Trying to get his get back. And if he tries to get his get back and then Shawn Porter uses his athleticism to box around, I do see Terrence Crawford's reach still being a problem, but Shawn Porter may be able to disrupt his rhythm. And if he disrupts his rhythm, gets enough rounds in the bag, all he has to do is really just avoid getting knocked out. And he may try to go for the knockout himself if Terrence Crawford comes in a little bit too reckless, but I just don't really see Shawn Porter having the power to do that based off his experiences. But most people that he's fought were reserved enough to avoid that happening to a certain extent. Like when Shawn Porter fought Keith Thurman, right? Keith Thurman, he made sure he fought on the back foot to not get tired out. He made sure that he used his foot speed. And Keith Thurman had some of the best foot speed in the division. Some pretty good ring generalship, but there's a difference between being able to fight off the back foot and being someone who rides the bike. And Keith Thurman was more so somebody who could box and he could brawl. But when Keith Thurman when he would brawl, he would be on the front foot heavy. But when he would box, he would get on the bike and he would kind of just run around the ring, right? So there's a difference between different styles and the nuances of people's boxing styles. Terrence Crawford, he can move around the ring, has some really great ring generalship, but within his ring generalship, he has knockout potential, moving backwards, moving forward, moving side to side. He can box. He has just so many tools in his arsenal. A big aspect of it is just going to be whether or not Terrence's ego is going to get him in trouble, or whether or not Terrence's ego is going to prove that he is really who he says he is, and whether or not who has done the best studying. And if we're going to talk about game plans, if we're going to talk about talent, we're going to talk about these different things, we got to talk about the trainers. So Bomac is one of the best strategists in the game. And I know Terrence Crawford typically says that he doesn't really make a game plan, but I think that his coach Bomac probably tailors the drills that they do in order to tailor those to a fighter. And I think that they may have preconceived notions about how Porter may come into fight when Porter's been improving himself. And Porter may come in with a different style than what they've intended on. And if it comes down to instincts, Terrence Crawford's probably going to win off the instincts. You get what I'm saying? But if we're talking about, the trainers and who's going to maximize, what they need to do and who has the best, and as far as a trainer and creating a game plan that maximizes the skills and the strengths of the fighter that they have at the table, Terrence Crawford's more talented, but Kenny Porter makes sure that he puts Sean Porter in the best position to win that he possibly can. And Sean Porter is someone who will listen to a certain extent to what his father has to say in order to try to hone in specific things. I do think that Sean Porter has been working on certain punches that he feels could work. Sean Porter probably could land a good overhand right. Sean Porter probably could disrupt Terrence Crawford's rhythm with the jab, because when Terrence Crawford is in the orthodox stance, he is susceptible to being hit with jabs, right? I could see Sean Porter possibly, throwing a jab, setting up a jab, right? And then faking the jab, coming with left hook up top, some overhand rights, maybe some punches that might hit a little questionably on the ear, behind the ear. But I do think that unless Sean Porter can hurt him quickly with those shots, that even when hurt, Terrence Crawford is always dangerous. I think that a knockout somewhat in the fashion of what he had with what's his name? Yuriorkis Gamboa is possible, right? That is somewhat possible, because Sean Porter's not the tallest fighter. He doesn't have the best reach. So if I were to really give my prediction, I could be wrong, but I'm going to just go out on a limb and say it. I'm going to say 8 to 9 round stoppage from Terrence Crawford. That's what I'm going to go with. I do think Sean Porter could win if he puts enough rounds in the bag up front, but I'm going to end it off by saying Terrence Crawford by 8 to 9 round stoppage.